This is a brief introduction to Australia as a nation, from 1750 to 1918. First off, we have a timeline of the major events that happened between 1770 and 1872. In 1770, James Cook landed at Botany Bay. In 1788, the first fleet came and was the first settlement at Sydney Cove. In 1804, the first settlement was established in Hobart. In 1813, the first crossing of Blue Mountains was completed, and there was British expansion inland. In 1824, the Queensland Moreton Bay settlement was established. Free settlers were forbidden from moving into the area, but rules became looser, and in 1838 they were allowed. In 1829, the Western Australian Swan River Colony settlement was built. People settled here because of fear the French were interested in colonising it. The main city was Perth. This was to be a free settlement with no convicts. However, in 1850, convicts were transported to this colony. In 1835, the Victoria settlement of Port Phillip Colony was established and was the foundation of Melbourne. In 1835, also, John Batten claimed to have signed a treaty for land by Wurundjeri elders. However, this was not considered valid because of terra nullius, which means nobody's land. It had great economic success and was a free settlement, assisting migrants who were brought in. In 1836, the South Australian settlement of Adelaide was established. This was the only colony not based on terra nullius and acknowledged the existence of Indigenous people. It was carefully based on a plan to create an ideal convict-free society and to recreate the best elements of the British homeland. In 1838, the Myall Creek massacre took place in New South Wales, during which 11 stockmen and convicts killed 30 unarmed Aborigines. They were tried, and 7 of them were hanged. In 1839, the Queensland colony settlement closed. In 1851, the gold rushes began. In 1856, the 8-hour working day was established. In 1859, the colony of Queensland was proclaimed. And finally, in 1872, free compulsory, non-religious, secular education was established too. Why were British colonies established in Australia? Well, the Industrial Revolution led to increased crime as towns became more populated. Britain therefore needed new prisons. After the American War of Independence, Britain found a solution: to send convicts to Botany Bay. Another reason why would be that Britain wanted raw materials such as timber and flax to build their ships. Furthermore, Great Britain wanted to extend its empire, so when British colonies established in Australia, it really killed multiple birds with one stone. Impact of colonisation on Indigenous people and the ongoing effects of colonisation. At the time, European settlers didn't think that Aborigines had any claim over the land, as there weren't any fences or buildings. However, there was a deeper spiritual connection to the land, and a shared ownership. European settlers, upon landing, introduced new species and diseases, disrupting the traditional way of Aboriginal life. From the disruption of the culture, only small amounts of Aborigines still live traditionally, with most of the Aboriginal population according to European society. Initially, interactions between the two peoples were peaceful, but that changed with violence from the Europeans. When winter approached, food was scarce and conflict grew. Kangaroos were killed for food, and Aborigines were kicked off the land for crops. Stocks of fish were also depleted and overfished. Over time, conflict grew, and there were deaths on both sides. Consequently, Governor Phillip reached out and kidnapped 3 Aboriginal men. Bennelong, one of the Aboriginal men, was taught English and European ways and tried to connect the two different cultures, but later died due to drinking. With the development of the British colonies in Australia, local Aboriginal population dropped. Aboriginal people in this time lived semi-nomadic, which means they lived in a place for a while and then they'd move. Traditional hunting areas were cleared for crops, making it hard for hunting and gathering. Disease and illness killed many Aborigines, as they didn't have the immunity to these diseases. Sexually transmitted diseases caused death and infertility, leading to declining birth rates. Conflicts between Europeans and Aboriginals increased ever more. Aboriginals conducted assaults on settlers and livestock in response to them taking over land. They attacked farms, stole livestock, and speared settlers. European settlers also conducted raids on camps, killing many Indigenous Australians in revenge. However, the Aborigines did join the police and became trackers, who are experts at following tracks. Missions and Protectorates. Government policies isolated Indigenous people by moving them to land known as missions. In this isolated area, they were taught English language and customs. This tore families apart in an attempt to simply civilize them. Many Aborigines escaped or died from disease, as the conditions of the missions weren't very good. Alcohol and tobacco abuse were common, which led to poor health. Diseases such as the cold and tuberculosis were by far the biggest killer. Other killers including syphilis, sexually transmitted diseases, which led to a declining birth rate, measles, influenza, and smallpox, which is thought to have wiped out 50% of the Aboriginal population. In this time period, the population declined from 300,000 to 90,000. In these missions, Aborigines were forced to speak English, wear European clothing, live in European cultures, adopt Christianity, and abandon their traditions. Most missions were failures, but some continued to respect Aboriginal culture as well as teach new European cultures, and succeeded. When Aborigines lose their culture, way of life, and land, it is called dispossession. Crops and the hooves of introduced animals destroyed Aborigines' links to the land. By late 19th century, there was a belief that Aboriginal people would die. There was a calling for the better treatment of Aborigines, but it further segregated it. Still, throughout the history, they weren't recognized as people, and until the referendum in 1967, Indigenous people were classified under the Flora and Fauna Act. Emerging Australian identity. A sense of Australian identity was slow to develop during the 19th century. Many immigrants were unwilling to bond to the Australian identity, including British people who were unwilling despite the cultures and customs being modelled after the motherland. For convicts being sent to this isolated land, it seemed like a place of exile, but throughout time, people became to see social and economic benefits of being Australian and embraced it. However, late in the 19th century, Australia's identity did develop. Clothing became lighter and less fussy, and different from Britain's style, as it was a different climate. Slang, new words, and pronunciations began to develop. Australians ate more nutritious diets with the available products, and sports such as AFL, cricket, and horse racing were played and watched, which helped unite Australia and define the nation. There was a freer and more egalitarian spirit. Egalitarianism is the idea that all people are equal and deserve equal rights and opportunities. Architecture of houses was unique as well, with the building of verandas being one example. Emerging Australian culture. A national identity also used to develop through art and literature with Australian styles. To begin, the Australian image that was painted was portrayed in dark colours with a hostile feel. Trees and other nature towered over people, who were drawn very small. Landscapes were then drawn more realistically with brighter colours like browns, blues, and yellows. People became more of the painting's focus in later years. There were focuses on everyday themes and ordinary people, and the feeling of this art became more relaxed and laid back. Writing was popular and positive. Many wrote of adventure, the environment, and the bush. This unique style with the themes made Australian writing its own sort of genre. This popularity of Australian ideas through writing helped the unification of Australia. Australian icons such as the Qantas logo also gave Australia identity. These icons in brands of Australia show the confidence of Australians. The idea of a united Australia. The idea of a united Australia was the movement towards a central new government. All the colonies had many similarities. They were settled by people from Britain, they spoke the same language, followed the same customs and traditions, had similar legal and political systems, believed in white superiority, and restricted immigration. Organisations even began branding themselves as Australian companies, such as the Australian Natives Association. January 26 became Australia Day, and in the 1890s, Australians began campaigning for federation. This shows how the idea of identity and unity grew into ideas for federation. There was a large demand for Australia to stay a white nation, with many immigrants such as Chinese and South Sea Islanders. The idea of uniting Australia through colour assisted in federation. Strict national policies on immigration came from this growth of a white national identity. The first law passed was the Immigration Restriction Act. This act contained a difficult dictation test, making it so only white immigrants could enter. Hope you learned something today, and thank you for watching this video. See ya!